Hi, everybody. So I have a wonderful guest on my show, and her name is Joyce, and she has this incredible channel on the MBTI. She has a whole community of people online in which she talks about personality types and talks about insights regarding typology. Be sure to check that out. I have a link down below in the description box. So Joyce, welcome to the show.
It's very nice to be on, Leon.
Today we have a very interesting and fascinating topic about learned helplessness and hopelessness and inferiority complex. I'm sure we all have felt these kind of feelings before. So, Joyce, what can you tell us about this?
So, learned helplessness is the feeling of giving up when things seem out of your control. I think that this is an extremely powerful concept because to give people a simple illustration, there are experiments done on dogs about learned helplessness. So there's one dog in a cage where they can jump out when they're shocked, and there's another dog that's put in a cage where they can't escape when they get shocked. So they're put into a second experiment where both dogs can actually jump out of the cage if they get shocked. But a strange phenomenon happens with the dog that's used to getting shocked and not be able to do anything about it. They just stay in the cage and they let themselves get electrified. And you'd be like, wow, why would the dog do that to themselves? They couldn't fully get out. And so oftentimes, when we're so used to feeling stuck, we can oftentimes feel comfortable there, and a state of hopelessness can set in, and we just settle or we just stay stagnant in a situation. Another illustration of this is there's this baby elephant where in the circus they had a rope around them and they weren't able to move around. And so when they became this big elephant, they could easily break through the rope, but they learned to not do it because when they were a little elephant, they tried and they weren't able to, and they just gave up trying to get out of that rope. And so this is a useful analogy for our life because oftentimes when we feel like we're not able to overcome a situation, there's this sense of feeling defeat and just letting whatever happen.
These are examples that apply very much to humans too, and humans experience the same exact thing when it comes to their lives.
Yeah. And when learned helplessness is experienced in an extreme way, it can result in depression or dysthymia. Because when you feel defeated or hopeless all the time, I think those can cause you to feel like you're not able to move forward in life. Because sometimes low-grade negative feelings can set in when we feel like we hit a plateau, when we're in a situation where we can't control something. And so I think the lack of control leads to a lot of other things. Yeah. Because it leads to I can't thinking. You enter a new situation, you're already like, I can't, instead of saying I'm not able to do this yet.
How do people reach that state? So it doesn't seem to be useful to them. Why would people keep perpetuating this idea that they're helpless?
I think it comes from their childhood experiences or experiences with their friends or strangers that were a certain moment in time that they solidified and froze in their mind. And they turn these memories into core memories, which change the way that they think about the world. And so oftentimes the negative thoughts that we have, they're infections from the outside world. Like your mother told you you weren't good enough, that anything you achieved, that it was a fluke or something else. And we took on the infection from our outer world and we just held on to this. And the reason why I think it's a healthy way to put outer world influence that's negative as an infection, because it helps distance you from that negative thought. You stop thinking that that negative thinking is you, but it's more of a cause of the systems around you that impact you.
Right. So this is a way to be able to cope. It's almost like saying, oh, this is how the world is, so I feel less shame around it.
Exactly. Instead of turning it into a you thing, which results in shame, I think that referring to it as almost a byproduct, an inheritance you get from your circumstance is more empowering because you're able to see the distance between you in the negative thought, it's not you, even if it feels so real.
Right.
It's just you internalizing these thoughts from other people. And oftentimes, the conversations that we have with ourselves in our own heads can be very dangerous, because if you spend a lot of time introspecting, that can turn into going over those negative thoughts over and over again. So you're not just experiencing that negative event one time, it's almost like you're experiencing it thousands of times. And no one knows this is going on until you show it externally through behavior.
Right. It just kind of builds up and bottles inside. So what are some ways to start to be able to recognize when we are having learned helplessness?
Yeah, when we have I can't statements and we're not following it up with I haven't figured it out yet, and not giving yourself the grace that you will eventually be able to do it. You can also tell it from knowing if you have a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So having a growth mindset means that you believe that your potential is malleable, that you believe that if you put in enough effort, you will be able to do the thing that you set your mind to. Whereas a fixed mindset is that you either can or you can't. Your potential is fixed. And if you have more of that kind of mindset, I think that's when you know that you have a little bit of learned helplessness, because you have stopped believing that you can do better than what you've already done. That's what makes students that have the image in their mind that they're smart not want to try things that are difficult, because now they're afraid of not seeming smart anymore. And so they'll just keep aiming low so that they'll always be smart. And sometimes our forms of self-protection don't help us with growth. And so oftentimes there's a trade-off. If you want to be invulnerable, you cut yourself from the most beautiful part of your life, being able to challenge yourself.
And why is that worthwhile? What makes it beautiful to go in that direction?
Because you get to discover parts of yourself you never knew existed. And there's something very enthralling through uncovering your whole self, because oftentimes we only feel permission to embody fractions of ourselves. But when you're cut off from other aspects of yourself, it can feel like you're half alive, or that you're not fully living up to the best version of yourself. And a part of your mind knows when you're not being at your fullest potential. And so when you're actually able to be brave and be vulnerable and be open to failing, you actually open yourself up to being alive.
And that's quite a switch to make, because getting from a place of believing nothing could change as a way to feel safe and comfortable, in the end, when one chooses growth, they feel better.
Yeah. Sometimes we can protect ourselves from failing because there's a fear of getting hurt, a fear of disappointment. And so to never feel disappointment again because it's been so unbearable, we just don't try at all. But I think when we develop better coping mechanisms, then it's okay for us to get disappointed, because then we have something to fall back on. And so I think people with high pain tolerances emotionally, they actually have really good coping mechanisms. And one of those could be they have really good self-compassion. So a way of going beyond a fixed mindset or kind of overcoming your learned helplessness is self-compassion. It is changing the voice in your head from this mean troll to a voice that you could see your best friend talking to you with. And that's hard, because if all your life you've been told otherwise, it can feel like you're lying to yourself when you say good things about yourself, because what's unfamiliar seems like a lie, or it seems uncomfortable, it seems untrue. And so the fake it till you make it has a little bit of truth to it, because sometimes you really do have to do that to feel self-love if all you've felt in your life is the opposite.
So what do you say if people say, I'm not there yet, or I don't have any sort of pain tolerance, or not believable for me to grow?
Support systems are really nice. So if you find people who love you and accept you for who you are, the right company that helps you on your destiny, then you will find it easier to develop healthier coping mechanisms. So oftentimes the people around us teach us to love ourselves more. We don't have to be codependent. I'm not telling people to be leeches on their friends, but I'm saying that they are good catalysts for good behaviors. So sometimes a wake-up call is having people who respect and give us dignity, because we might not realize the ways in which we've been viewing ourselves in an unkind manner until people actually treat us kind.
Right.
Just like how someone who's been in a cave their whole life doesn't know how it's like to be outside of that cave. One thing that really helps too is questioning yourself. If you notice a negative thought in your head coming up, it's also to say, is that really true? And after a while, you'll get used to challenging the negative thoughts in your mind too. And you'll be like, yeah, maybe that isn't true.
It'll get easier to do.
It'll get easier to do. Like at first, when people compliment you, you might think it's fake. And you're like, oh, I hate compliments because they're all lying to me. But maybe the real thing is that you don't see anything good about yourself. So it's hard to accept anything good that other people say about you. And eventually you might have a meta view on your thoughts. So you'll be able to be the observer of your own thoughts. And then from that, you'll be able to change it.
Right. To be able to observe, get some distance from that part of you that feels this learned helplessness.
I think it's a loving approach because you're still validating that what you're feeling in the moment makes sense, but you're also able to view it as a distance. So it's not the ultimate truth.
And so can you tell me how this relates with inferiority complex?
There's a lot of us when we're in our careers or in our lives, even with our friends, we feel like we don't deserve it. We feel like everyone has their life figured out and we just don't. And I think that's a way of feeling like we're not good enough, which is where all of this stems from. Learned helplessness, you don't feel good enough and you feel like you're trapped. And also in imposter syndrome, you don't feel good enough. It feels like when you have everything figured out, then you'll be good enough. But you'll never have everything figured out. You'll just find a new thing that you won't feel good enough about.
Right.
And so I think that imposter syndrome is not allowing yourself the grace to be a work in progress, to be under construction, because we're all like construction sites that are still in the making. And so when we don't allow ourselves compassion for the messiness that is us, then we oftentimes become very self-critical. And this all leads back to self-compassion. When we lack self-compassion, then we don't have the resilience when it comes to challenge, because then we're just going to be hypercritical on ourselves. And then we won't be able to be strong in times where we can endure and try for ourselves.
Right. I like the idea that you mentioned about people are always feeling like they need to have something that's figured out. And what they're looking for is some sort of external change when the change is really needed is an internal one.
Exactly.
Yeah, can you tell us more about the role of self-compassion here to be able to address learned helplessness and also inferiority complex?
Yeah, so Leon has a great article about this on his website. And I think the way you can use self-compassion is to realize that everyone feels like they're an imposter, that they don't deserve to be where they're at, because we are all people who are fumbling around in the dark trying to figure out where to go, and we are just feeling around to know where we're going. Self-doubt is normal and it's healthy. And I think the part that generates shame and judgment is we think that we're worse than everyone else.
Right.
But the acknowledgement that this is not just a you experience, that everyone goes through this, there's some sort of comfort from feeling like you're not special. We all feel defective in our own special way. That we all have our own challenges and struggles, and that when you get to know people, their humanity, you get to know that everyone is trying to go through life as best as they can. We were just summoned here by a happenstance. I think coming to terms with the absurdity of life and realizing that you don't need to have everything sorted out to be good enough, that you can be just good enough as you are. And that you have this unconditional high regard, as you talk about, Leon, and unconditional love for yourself, just because you are beautiful by fact of existing. And sometimes we spend so much time aiming for the goals in our lives, we don't smell the flowers of what we are actually having that's so great now. Something that really helps me is I think of my life as I already have the ice cream, and so everything I'm aiming for is just the cherry on top. And we can view all of our lives like that. Most of us, if you're viewing this video, you have a house or you have a place to sleep. You have the ice cream, and everything you're pursuing in life is the cherry on top. And so what this metaphor or analogy helps teach us is we are whole as we already are, and everything is just a addition, or it's just a nice little surprise or thing to add on, but
Right.
you are good enough.
So you're completely full onto yourself. Nothing else could subtract from that, right?
Exactly.
From that fullness. Great. Yeah, I like how what you mentioned there. It's like there's all internal richness that we have that is always accessible to us. And everyone feels that sense of vulnerability, like it's the common human condition to feel like that we're not enough, but actually everyone here is enough onto themselves.
We just forgot that we were enough.
Mm.
We're all born with a sense of feeling enough, but then we lose it as we get shame throughout our lives, whether it's someone telling us about shame or we look around us and we start to feel shame through comparison. I think life is a lot about relearning that you are good enough. And it's hard because it can feel like, wow, there's a mourning you have to do when you realize that you haven't been treating yourself as you are good enough. There's a heartbreak that comes from acknowledging your self-neglect. So you realize, wow, I actually am good enough. So that means for the past 30 years of my life, I have been neglecting myself in small ways, and I haven't even been able to recognize it. So there's a grief you have when you learn self-compassion, because then you learn about all the little times in which you didn't take care of yourself. And that's totally human, and that's totally okay.
You mentioned about people adopting that identity of being helpless or being hopeless or being inferior when they're able to come out of that they would even start to grieve that identity that they had.
Yeah. They're grieving that they haven't recognized it sooner.
And what would make it worth it for people to make that change out of that previous identity if there is a grieving process?
Yeah, that it's uncomfortable, but most of the things that are worth it in life require a uncomfortability or getting out of your comfort zone. Like the happiness you seek, it is at the outer edge of or outside of your comfort zone.
Right. Well, I imagine that there's like a bittersweetness to it.
There is.
So Joyce, thank you so much for being on my channel and speaking on this important subject. I'm glad that you're able to bring your word into my show and share it with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
I have Joyce's material down below in the description box.